Part 23. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guangguanggongzi. Chapter 221. In the streets of Chang'an City, all eyes were on Zulu, who had just appeared out of nowhere. Compared with Qingque, who appeared last month, the heat had been completely suppressed. However, no matter how big the affairs of the martial arts world were, they were trivial matters for the kings, princes, generals, and ministers. As the night fell quietly, the peach blossom forest in the Imperial College gradually withered, and the petals fell in the courtyard, and were blown by the gradually warm night wind and piled up under the courtyard wall. Song Yu sat alone in the tea-house, and the original teapot was replaced with a wine pot. He tilted his head to look at the sky, and his expression was slightly gloomy. Squeak! The courtyard door opened, and Lu Yunlin, who was in disguise, entered the courtyard carrying a bamboo basket. He put down 2 baskets of rice paper outside the tea-house and stepped forward to pay a respectful salute. "Your Majesty, things seem to have taken a turn for the better. Today, the spies in Furong Temple saw Su Buling coming out from the back mountain where he was recuperating. Although he was leaning on a cane, his complexion and demeanor were relatively good. His injuries should have recovered a lot." Song Yu put down the wine pot, shook his head and smiled softly. Buling was originally a person favored by heaven. How could he become a useless person so easily? It's good that he has recovered, and the plan has finally been successful. Lu Yunlin frowned and thought, according to the imperial physician, the dragon-locking poison has already taken effect. Although it has not entered the heart and lungs, it is difficult for him to stand up. It's very difficult. Su Buling can actually recover to walk in just over 20 days. His physique is too strong. Song Yu frowned and thought for a moment, it's useless to just recover physically. I don't know how much martial arts have recovered. Let's find a way to test the depth. Yes. Lu Yunlin thought for a while, even if his martial arts have recovered a little, it's impossible to be as strong as before the Taiji Palace. It will take at least half a year to recover from the broken bones. Should we continue to walk according to the prince's plan? Song Yu took a sip of the wine pot and thought for a while. Over time, there will inevitably be complications. Give him some time to recover, get ready first, and start immediately after he is sure to recover. Lu Yunlin nodded, said no more, and retreated silently. Under the same full moon, at the foot of Yufeng Mountain 10 years away, the summer resort lit palace lanterns, and the maids and guards sent from Chang'an City walked around in the resort. Although there were many people serving the Empress Dowager's food and daily life, the huge summer resort also seemed sparse. The silver moon was reflected in the lake, and a few lotus flowers were blooming under the terrace. A little light was on in the window near the lake. The window was half open, revealing the beautiful side face of a woman. The golden hairpin flashed a few points of light under the dim light and moonlight. In the large bedroom facing the lake, there were screens, soft couches, teapots, chessboards, piano tables, etc., which made the room look simple and elegant. The Queen Mother was wearing a red dress. Because she had just bathed, her clothes were half open and not closed, revealing the red lotus carp hidden inside. Her face was chubby, and her long eyelashes trembled with her blinks. From time to time, she muttered to herself, "This thing is so weird." On the table against the wall, a piece of rice paper was pressed down by a paperweight, and on it was painted with a brush a plain egg-shaped object. It was actually not much different from the architectural and mechanical drawings of this world, but the shape was very weird. There were gears, springs, etc. inside, which looked a bit complicated. Next to the rice paper were files, gold wires, twisters, etc., as well as pure gold eggshells and gear embryos cast by the palace jewelers. Next to the candle lamp stood a wooden figure, who had long finished eating the candied haws in his hand, and now replaced them with the Empress Dowager's earrings, bracelets, and other items, hanging on it, and looked a little funny with all the jewels. The Empress Dowager took a small file and carefully polished the small pure gold gear in her hand, looking at the drawings from time to time, and then continued to work. The Huainan Xiao family has been famous for its diverse learning since ancient times, and has been involved in Confucianism, Moism, Taoism, legalism, etc., and is unique in its research on various exquisite objects. Many of the famous buildings, dams, bridges, and even the 8-ox crossbow, siege vehicles, armor, etc. in the Central Plains are the work of the ancestors of the Xiao family. The Queen Mother is the legitimate daughter of the Xiao family. She used to be exposed to these strange things at home. When she came to the palace, she had nothing to do all day, so she put all her thoughts on these things. After 10 years, she would definitely be a jeweler with her little skills. The drawings given by Su Buling were just rough ideas. The details were the attention of the Queen Mother to the staff. The general meaning was, there was a small spring inside the hollow egg, connected to the cam. The spring stored power to drive the cam to rotate. Because of the unstable center of gravity, the egg would jump. The principle is similar to the vibration of modern mobile phones. The night was long, and the Queen Mother might have been thinking too long and her eyes were a little tired, so she stretched and tilted her head to look at the light on the mountain in the distance. Calculating the days, it seems that I can go to Furong Temple tomorrow. The Queen Mother stretched slightly stiff, and her legs softened involuntarily, and she was actually a little afraid. It's not that I'm afraid of Su Buling, but Su Buling plows the field at night, like an ox. The Queen Mother felt a little annoyed when she thought about it. Although she was helping Su Buling to detoxify, and he committed suicide to apologize after the detoxification, she could barely suppress the hurdle in her heart. But she was a woman after all, and she didn't know martial arts, and her body couldn't withstand the torment of women who practiced martial arts since childhood. It was naturally a bit too much for her to be messed with by Su Buling. Every time she came back from Furong Temple, she had to lie down for a day to recover. She was floating when she walked, and Xiao Yi thought she was sick. This evil creature. The Queen Mother's eyes showed some anger and dissatisfaction. She always felt that Su Buling was not simply detoxifying, but was still using her kindness to vent some unspeakable things. But she was in a weak position in this matter, and she couldn't kick Su Buling out. After a while of sulking, the Queen Mother took the mahogany sign from the little man on the table and looked at the words on it, right and right. Her face showed a bit of worry. It took so long to get only 13 times, when will it get 100 times? But the sufferings of these 13 times alone made her a little bit overwhelmed, and she couldn't urge Su Buling to hurry up. In a state of confusion, the Queen Mother sighed, folded her arms and walked back and forth in the room, her face as serious and upright as always, treating this as a serious matter of saving lives and healing the wounded, but she couldn't help thinking about going up the mountain tomorrow. By then, I'm afraid I will suffer again, that evil creature. The moonlight shone faintly in the villa. Su Buling silently climbed over the wall of the summer resort, without alarming the guards lurking everywhere, and quickly moved towards the lakeside where the Queen Mother slept. At first, he approached the Queen Mother with the purpose of detoxification, but Su Buling was not a ruthless person who was full of utilitarianism. Now that he had recovered 20% to 30%, he was no longer so anxious. The main thing was to cultivate feelings with the Queen Mother under the moonlight. Tonight, I came here specially wearing the black embroidered gold-edged robe that Aunt Lu had just sewn by hand. I tied my hair up and pinned it with a jade hairpin. I dressed simply, elegantly, and cleanly. I also bought a candied horse from the market at the foot of the mountain. I was quite well prepared. Passing through the corridor by the lake, I gradually came to the outside of the lighted room. Su Buling listened attentively. Now that his martial arts had recovered 30%, his hearing perception naturally recovered at the same time. After confirming that there was only one breathing sound in the room, he climbed in through the half-open window. In March, the room was neither cold nor hot. There was a small light on the table, but there was no figure in front of the table. Su Buling walked softly through the outer room and glanced. The things on the table had not been put away. They should have just been tossed halfway. Fearing that the Queen Mother's hard work would be ruined, Su Buling did not touch the golden eggshell on the table. He just took a look and nodded with satisfaction. Then he turned around and walked to the soft couch following the sound of breathing, leaned over to take a look, and raised his eyebrows slightly. On the carved soft couch next to the tea table for people to lie on their sides, the Queen Mother's skirt was half undone, revealing the lotus carp that was a little tight, and the two carp were trembling slightly. Her hand was stuffed under the lotus carp, and the other hand was even more unruly. Her feet were slightly bent and tangled together, and the whole person rubbed against the soft couch like a caterpillar. Woo! The breath was as sweet as orchid. There were beads of sweat on her slightly red cheeks. Because she was born to sweat more, her body was also watery and shiny, and she looked a little delicious under the dim light. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 222. Moon on the Branches. The Queen Mother was dizzy. When she was half asleep and half awake with her eyes closed, she seemed to notice that there was someone else beside her. She opened her eyes slightly and her face was as white as jade and handsome. She looked like someone who had stepped out of a painting. She was still holding something in her hand. Candied haws with roots. Brother Ling. The Queen Mother's low voice, as if she was murmuring in sleep, seemed to be absent. Her mind was somewhere else, and it was probably just a hallucination. Biting her finger, her eyes were very charming, and she straightened up slightly, saying hurry up, hurry up. Su Buling blinked. He really didn't expect it to be such a coincidence. After thinking about it, he leaned forward in front of the Queen Mother. The Queen Mother's breath was slightly hot, and she took the initiative to kiss Su Buling on the lips, but this feels so real. The Queen Mother's dizzy eyes gradually condensed, and her mind returned. She blinked her almond-shaped eyes, first with a bit of doubt, then her face turned red, and then suddenly turned white. Ah! With a soft scream, the Queen Mother pushed Su Buling away fiercely, stood up, folded her red skirt and hugged her arms, and glared at the man in front of her angrily. You, promise. You are so brave, you actually. His face was sometimes red and sometimes white, and he tried hard to look majestic and angry, but he couldn't hide the shame, anger, and embarrassment in his eyes. What was I doing just now? I must have fallen into his magic. Su Buling knew this would happen, smiled softly, sat next to him, and handed over the candied haws in his hand. Please forgive me for coming here rashly. The Queen Mother was in a state of panic both mentally and physically. She was already embarrassed to have been caught in the scandal, so she was not in the mood to chat with Su Buling, and said anxiously. You get out of here, get out now. Su Buling didn't feel angry at all. He sat closer and said softly. It's all here. Pooh. When the Queen Mother heard this, her legs went weak, she moved a little to the side, gritted her silver teeth, raised her hand and pointed outside. You go, I will help you detoxify, it's out of kindness. When to detoxify depends on what I want. If you come here without saying hello, what do you think I am? Yours are nothing. Hurry up. Roll. Sing's eyes were round and he tried his best to look fierce. His posture was indeed leaning on the soft couch, looking scared. Su Buling looked a little funny. He raised his hand to hold his slender wrist and looked at the slender white fingers with some water stains. The Queen Mother was stunned for a moment, then she realized what she was doing, and she quickly wanted to take her finger back, but she didn't expect the finger to be bitten by the smelly man in front of her. Ah, shut up, you, I am wrong, please don't do this. The Queen Mother was like crazy and couldn't pull her fingers back. She could only look at Su Buling with a blushing face, somewhat begging for mercy. Only then was Su Buling satisfied. He let go of the Queen Mother's baby and sat upright on the soft couch, holding up the red candied horse and shaking it. I traveled a long way to buy it. I'll leave after eating. The Queen Mother stared, wondering what Su Buling meant. If she could leave honestly tonight, she would write her name upside down. You are not allowed to come here like this in the future. Just this once, if you dare to make your own decisions again, I will commit suicide now. Okay, next time you come over, knock on the door first. The Queen Mother gritted her lower teeth, perhaps wanting to put aside what had just happened. She sat up straight and looked dignified, looked at the candied haws, and said coldly, I am not a 3-year-old child, so I don't want to eat these things. Su Buring nodded, raised his hand, stuffed the candied haws into his mouth, and bit off one. Naturally, the Queen Mother would not be provoked by this. She snorted lightly and didn't care at all. But she immediately noticed that Su Buring was approaching with a candied haws in his mouth. The Queen Mother had suffered a loss and quickly raised her hand to cover her mouth, frowning and said in a low voice, You are so presumptuous, I. Then she stood up and went to get the poisoned wine that was always ready. Su Buling smiled with his eyebrows curved, and he was not in a hurry. He inserted the candied haws in the fruit plate on the table and leaned on the soft table with the posture of a gentleman. Don't move. The Queen Mother felt relieved now and moved her hips to sit on the other end of the soft couch. The room was very quiet. The two of them were sitting on the couch. They had a big job to do later, so the atmosphere was naturally getting weirder and weirder. The Queen Mother tried her best to keep a cool face and looked around the room, as if looking for something to talk about to ease the atmosphere. Su Buling stared at the profile of his face under the candlelight, thought for a moment, and spoke first. When the Queen Mother entered the palace, were she familiar with Queen Kui and King Yan Songyu? The Queen Mother frowned and glanced at Su Buletinling. After thinking about it for a while, she rolled over the sheets without being too shy. She raised her hand to straighten the scattered clothes and said calmly, My son and daughter-in-law are naturally familiar with each other. Su Buletinling felt strange hearing this. Although the Queen Mother was only 1 year older than Queen Kui and more than 10 years younger than Songyu, this was actually the case. I've been in the capital for more than a year, and I don't know much about these things. Anyway, it's been a long night. Why don't you tell me about it later? Seeing that the Queen Mother's bun was a little messy, Su Buling came up to her while he was talking, raised his hand to pull off the golden hairpin, and then picked up the comb. The Queen Mother's eyes were wary, and she realized that Su Buling was just combing her hair. She hesitated for a moment, but she didn't turn her away anymore, and just turned her back. There's nothing to say, ever since Queen Kui entered the palace, she has stayed in the Lijian Palace and never went out, even during the holidays. I have actually not seen her a few times in Changle Palace. I just heard from the palace maid that Queen Kui I was a bit bored, and no one paid attention to me, not even the Holy One. Maybe I got sick from suppressing it in the end, and left at a young age. Su Buling held Yi Kingxi and sighed softly. The Queen Mother is actually a talkative person. She has been in the palace for 10 years and will talk for a long time whenever she meets someone who can talk. Seeing that Su Buling was willing to listen at this time, even though he was not willing in his heart, he couldn't help but continue to talk about the past. King Yan has excellent literary talent, and his reputation has always been very high. But, alas, he is a scholar after all. I once chatted with Empress Jija, and Empress Jija said something in private when the late emperor was still there. Everything is possible, but I alone cannot be a king. However, these words must not be put on the table and said to hurt King Yan's heart. King Yan actually knew himself. After the late emperor died of illness, he directly said that power is not enough to inherit the great power. He gave up the throne on the grounds of unification, but I didn't expect that he didn't even want the throne in the end, and went to the Imperial Academy to teach for so many years. Well, he deserves the reputation of a true gentleman. The Queen Mother spoke intermittently. On the one hand, it was memories, and on the other hand, the man's breath inadvertently blew against her ears. It felt a bit strange, her cheeks were involuntarily hot, and her thoughts kept drifting to other places. Su Buling calmly raised his hair and came close to her ear. A true gentleman, I'm afraid I can't afford it, huh? The Queen Mother trembled and tilted her head in annoyance. Do you still know? You are an evildoer, stay away from me. Su Buling frowned slightly and asked knowingly, just before I came, the Queen Mother had no intention of letting me stay away. The Queen Mother's face suddenly showed a bit of embarrassment, and she said coldly, I just fell asleep and was dreaming. Who are you dreaming about? The words brother Ling sound a bit familiar. No. The Queen Mother stared with big eyes, obviously being forced to do nothing. Su Bulletin Ling stopped clicking and apologized softly, okay, I won't say any more, detoxification. The Queen Mother bit her lower lip and her eyes were full of annoyance. She felt a slight sinking behind her back, and she seemed to push her down. She said seriously, if you want to detoxify, detoxify. Don't say that you don't have these things, or I won't help you. Okay, I understand your mistake. The Queen Mother pursed her lips and hesitated for a moment, but had no other choice but to half push and half push her down. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 223. On the evening of April 3, a sudden rainstorm swept across the mountains and rivers. The heavy dark clouds seemed to be pressing on the top of Yufeng Mountain. Lightning flashed through the clouds, making it difficult to tell which lightning bolt the continuous thunder came from. There was basically no one walking around in Furong Temple, and the maids and guards were hiding in the house. Lights were burning in the cliffside house among the bamboo sea. Su Buling packed his nightgown, face skin, and other things in the package, and took the bamboo hat and raincoat from Lao Xiao, preparing to meet Zhang Xiang at night. Lao Xiao was talking about the information he had found out. Young prince, I checked it out. Zhang Xiang lives in Kongningfang. There are not many people in his house. There are several wolf guards from Tianziying patrolling day and night. His adopted son Zhang Tingbao just gave birth to a son and lives nearby. In recent years, except for literary and poetry gatherings, Yan Wang Songyu generally does not leave the Imperial College and does not contact anyone. It seems that there is no problem. Also, Miss Song seems to have left Chang'an. Hearing this, Su Buling frowned slightly. Where did this damn girl go? Lao Xiao curled his lips. She left with Su Danking. I guess she went to Yuelu Mountain to find the old immortal. Su Buling was relieved and thanked him, nodding slightly. Walking out of the house and looking around the bamboo forest. Aunt Lu won't come back tonight, right? Old Xiao shook his head. Mrs. Lu will go back to the city today to buy daily food and clothing for the little prince. It's raining so hard that she can't go up the mountain. She will probably come back tomorrow when the rain stops. Don't worry. After Su Buling listened quietly to the information old Xiao had gathered, he hung the package on his body, put on his bamboo hat, and jumped directly down from the steep cliff. He went up and down all the way and came to the foot of Yufeng Mountain. Mobile. The heavy rain was drizzling, and there were no passers-by in the town at the foot of the mountain. All doors and windows were closed. Su Buling took the horse that had been prepared long ago from the stable of an inn, jumped on the horse and galloped towards Chang'an City 10 miles away. At present, the dragon-locking goo on Su Buling's body was equivalent to being solved, but how to leave Chang'an City was still a big problem. The best situation should be to stay there for 3 years in peace and stability, and then returned to the fiefdom. But there was obviously a black hand behind him. He first poisoned him to limit his martial arts, and then detoxified him to restore some martial arts after he made himself a cripple. This was obviously to use his martial arts to achieve some purpose. Before this purpose was achieved, the person behind him would definitely not let him get away safely. With the skills shown by the ambush in Weha River and the dragon locking goo, the black hand behind him was obviously not a small fish. Even the Xiao family did not find a solution to the dragon locking goo after decades of research, but the person behind it found it. In some ways, the person behind it was more powerful than the Huainan Xiao family. The only one who was more powerful than the Huainan Xiao family in Daya was the Song family. But the Song family was a royal family. The 6 vassal kings and the emperor all had the surname Song, and there were also some illegitimate princes of the previous emperor. They all had the ability to attack him, but it was difficult to directly determine which one was the specific one. Su Buling's plan was to remain unchanged in the face of all changes. Once the dragon locking goo was solved, the knife on his neck was gone. He could just ignore the black hand behind the scenes and tempt him. But whether he accepted the challenge or not, he had to find out who was behind the attack and what was the purpose. While planning, the horses galloped across the plain outside Chang'an City like thunder and arrived at the city wall. Su Buling went around to a place where the city wall was sparsely defended, tied his horse in a forest, inserted a dagger into the brick cracks of the city wall, and climbed up the 36-foot-high city wall with 2 big steps without a sound, and came to the streets of Chang'an. Under the night rain, Chang'an City was still brightly lit. From a high place, it looked no different from the modern neon street market, except that it lacked a little colorful color. Su Buling was like a ghost, rising and falling on the roofs of the houses, crossing Chang'an and first arriving at a small courtyard in Kongrenfang. There was nothing in the small courtyard. The clothesline was still tied under the window, and the bamboo hat and raincoat were hung on the wall. There were no water stains, which meant that he didn't go out today. Su Buling arranged Lao Chi to keep an eye on Zhu Manzi. He knew that Zhu Manzi had been restless these days. She had packed her things several times to go to Yufeng Mountain, but she came back halfway. It was probably because she heard the news about Zulu. Su Buling raised his hand and pushed the door. The door was locked and not pushed. The breathing inside was steady, and it sounded like she was asleep. He thought about it for a while, used a dagger to open the door, and entered the room. There was a little bit of girl's incense in the room. The goose feather knife was casually placed on the table. I didn't know where I bought the iron sword and placed it on the sword platform. There were 3 incense sticks. There was also a portrait hanging behind the sword platform. It was a portrait of an old man with a white beard standing with a sword. The portrait of the old sword Saint Zhu Zhoushan, which was sold for 1 penny on the street. Su Buling raised his eyebrows. He was a little worried at first, but after seeing this scene, he was a little amused. Looking around, Zhu Manzi was lying on the embroidered bed on the inside of the house, with her legs spread out in a big shape. It rained again in April and there were no mosquitoes, so the curtains were not drawn. The short girl didn't sleep well, with the quilt covering her belly tightly, her 2 tight legs exposed, wearing close-fitting lotus-colored thin pants, and a red belly band embroidered with 2 mandarin ducks. Because she was well developed, the belly band actually looked a little small, with a rounded outline on the edge, bulging and a little tight with her breathing. Su Buling put down his hat, walked over to take a closer look, and saw that she was sleeping soundly, with a smile on her lips and her eyelashes trembling. She seemed to be dreaming a very cool dream, and looked very proud. Su Buling raised his hand and pinched his face. Ugh, it's getting dark. Zhu Manzi swept away his hands, turned over and faced inside, pulled up the quilt to cover his belly band, and pouted in dissatisfaction, but when he woke up, his face froze. It's me. Zhu Manzi opened her eyes and quickly closed them. She took a deep breath and pretended to be asleep. She quietly slipped into the quilt, but she forgot that her buttocks were not covered. Snap! A crisp sound resounded in the hut. Zhu Manzi shivered and didn't dare to pretend any more. He turned over hurriedly and wrapped himself in the quilt. His face turned red and his eyes were shy. "Mr. Su, what are you doing?" Su Buling looked stern and said calmly, "Watch mosquitoes." Zhu Manzi frowned, looked at Su Buling sitting next to him, and shrank to the corner of the bed. "There are no mosquitoes." I said yes. Zhu Manzi was not stupid. He blushed and held it in for a while, but still did not refute. He just whispered, "Mr. Su, why are you here? Are you healed?" Su Buling stood up, walked to the table with his back turned, and took off the package on his shoulders. Something happened. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 224. Thank you for the reward from Gong Aoxiu. In a small room, Su Buling was packing his nightgown and other items at the table. Zhu Manzi, who was wrapped in a quilt, took the opportunity to quickly get the dress from the bedside and put it on, jumped off the bed, stepped on the embroidered shoes, and tied up her hair. She packed it up in almost the blink of an eye, and even looked at it in the small bronze mirror. After confirming that it was very beautiful, Zhu Manzi walked up to Su Buling a little awkwardly and looked at the nightgown in his hand. "Mr. Su is going to do something." Su Buling nodded and sorted things by himself. Zhu Manzi glanced at the portrait and sword next to him, and found that Su Buling didn't pay attention at all, so he thought. "Do you want me to help?" Su Buling raised his eyebrows. "Your kung fu is so bad, and you are not smart, what can you do?" "This is the point." Zhu Manzi walked slowly to the sword platform and the portrait, picked up the crude iron sword, and blinked. "Mr. Su, guess whose granddaughter I am?" "Who?" Zhu Manzi held the sword and posed as Ning Qingyi, and said casually, "Well, a few days ago, I accidentally heard about my father on the street. It turns out that my grandfather is Zhu Zhoushan, the old swordsman of the Yuzhu family. Mr. Su, you have heard of him, right?" Su Buling took off his outer robe, put on his nightgown, and said casually, "I have heard of him." Mobile terminal. Zhu Manzi's slow expression froze, and he frowned strangely, thinking for a while. "Well, my father went to the Lu family in Donghai a few days ago, that is, the family of Mr. Su's grandfather, and took back the title of Sword Saint. He became one of the 10 martial arts champions of Daewoo, and the new Sword Saint of the contemporary era." "Oh." Su Buling applied his yellow face like a mask, and patted his cheeks with his hands. Zhu Manzi stood there holding the sword, stunned for a moment, and became a little anxious. "Mr. Su, it's the Sword Saint, the one who uses the sword the best in Daewoo, is my father." Su Buling acted nonchalant. "Then what?" "Then, there is nothing." Zhu Manzi suddenly felt wronged, and there was a deep loss in his eyes. Ever since meeting Su Buling, Zhu Manzi felt that he was unattainable. After all, he was the prince of a vassal king, a master of martial arts, extremely beautiful, and could write poetry. No matter how hard she thought, she could not imagine herself and Su Buling as the same kind of people. Even being a guard was a bit of a stretch, and she probably could only lead a horse and run errands. But in her heart, she really regarded Su Buling as a good friend. She had been looking for her parents for more than a year, but when she really heard her father's name outside Longjian Pavilion, the joy, excitement, grievance, and complaints she had thought of after finding her parents did not appear. Instead, an inexplicable thought popped up in her mind: Master Su will definitely be surprised this time. I am better than Xiaoning. What is the master of Suan Hibaqui? My father is a contemporary sword saint and martial arts champion, so powerful. I hope my father will become a dragon. Zhu Manzi didn't know why such a strange idea came up, but the idea of reuniting with her family day and night faded a lot. She felt relieved knowing that her family was safe. When she heard the news, she didn't want to find her father, but couldn't wait to find Su Buling to tell him the great news, and then heard a sentence, "Wow, Miss Zhu is so powerful," just like she was surprised and jealous when she knew that Xianing's master was the most beautiful woman in the world. These days at home, she didn't think about how to find her father, but how to tell Su Buling about this news after meeting him. She rolled around in bed all day, and when she dreamed, her mind was full of Su Buling's reaction after he finally looked up to her. But it seems that he still doesn't take it seriously. That's right, how could a dignified prince of a vassal state regard a martial artist as a powerful character? There are so many of them in the mansion. Zhu Manzi lowered her head, put down the sword angrily, and pouted her lips and didn't speak. After Su Buling finished applying the mask, he walked up to her, looked down at her, and chuckled. "Wow, Miss Zhu is so amazing." Zhu Manzi was unhappy, hesitated, looked at the tip of her shoes and whispered, "Humph, no sincerity, the young master is obviously not excited." Su Buling raised his hand and pinched her face, "Why should I be excited? Originally you were helpless, I took you back to Suzhou. Now your father is so powerful, I want to take you home and I have to say hello to your father, I don't have time to worry about it." Zhu Manzi was stunned, pursed her lips and thought for a while, "Young Master Su, why did you take me home? Be a retainer, a gentleman's word is hard to go back, but you promised to go back with me, could it be that just because you have a powerful father, you want to raise the price?" "I won't agree." Zhu Manzi said, "Oh," and thought for a while, "A man in the martial arts world is as good as his word. I was born in a famous family in the martial arts world, and I am the only designated heir of the Zhu family sword. I will not go back on my word." Su Buling shook his head and chuckled, thinking for a while, "Just find your parents, don't think about those messy things in the future, and feel inferior to others. In my opinion, even if Miss Zhu doesn't have those false names, she is no worse than anyone else." "Really?" Zhu Manzi blushed, a little unbelieving, pursed her lips, "Mr. Su, I feel that I am not as good as Xiaoning in everything. What do you think I am not worse than her?" Su Buling blinked and looked down. Zhu Manzi looked down, her face flushed, and she was a little embarrassed and annoyed. "Mr. Su, you are annoying." Su Buling shook his head and chuckled, then turned around and continued to pack his things. Zhu Manzi stood by and felt shy for a while, then moved his eyes to Su Buling's smutty face, hesitated for a moment, but couldn't help but laughed. "Mr. Su. You're so ugly. Hee hee." Su Buling was so upset that he raised his hand and patted Zhu Manzi's buttocks, who was laughing secretly. "You should know how to use the Zhu family sword, just show me how to use it." Zhu Manzi dodged quickly, a little embarrassed, "My father taught me swordsmanship, but I only learned one move, and I don't know the others. I'm not as good as the knives in the government office. It doesn't matter, as long as I have the appearance." "Oh." Zhu Manzi thought about it, and since she was familiar with Su Buling, she didn't feel shy, so she drew out the iron sword and started to use the cuckold sword in the house. Hoo hoo ha ha. The sword was waving wildly. Zhu Manzi hadn't used a sword for a long time. Except for the life-saving move that he was forced to learn by the stick education, most of the other moves were just random chopping. Regardless of the martial arts, the deterrent power was definitely enough. Su Buling sat on a stool and watched. He wanted to see what the Zhu family sword looked like, but after two swords were chopped down, he coughed lightly, stood up and moved away. He also had to be careful that Zhu Manzi would chop him accidentally. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 225. Most of the people living in Kongrenfang are people who work in the government, mostly military attaches. Basically all the wolf guards who stayed in the capital live here. It is very appropriate to describe it as a wolf den. For this reason, Kongrenfang and Hutai Street are completely opposite. They are the places that Jianghu people dislike the most, and they are also the safest places in Chang'an City. Fastest update PC version : The heavy rain was pouring, scattered among the streets of the mansion, and there were some noises in the tea houses and restaurants. The wolf guards who came home late were holding umbrellas or walking in raincoats. Occasionally, they cursed the weather is a bitch or shouted at the door of the house. Pour out the water from your boots. Creak creak. In the midst of the heavy rain, Lu Yunlin, deputy director of the Criminal Investigation Department, stood outside his house, holding a gift box and an umbrella in his hand, talking to a wolf guard, as if a superior was communicating with a passing subordinate. Things have been arranged clearly. The wolf guard, who had a bronze medal hanging on his waist, leaned forward slightly and said seriously. It's been arranged. We're looking for Cao Meng, a ranger who just arrived in Chang'an. He's quite famous in the past few years. Judging from his skills, he should be able to break into the bamboo forest behind Furong Temple. The heavy rain will cover up the sound tonight, and spies can also sneak in by taking advantage of the chaos. View results nearby. Lu Yunlin nodded and said softly, the news won't leak, right? Wolfguard raised his hands and clasped his fists. Don't worry, sir. Cao Meng only wants money and does not take the killing business. He only told him the place and his approximate appearance. He doesn't know who he wants to beat or who arranged it. It won't be leaked. The sound of wind. Lu Yunlin nodded lightly and asked his subordinates to retreat. After waiting for a while, a carriage entered from the gate, walked onto the main street of Kongrenfang, and stopped outside the house. After Lu Yunlin jumped onto the luxurious carriage, he put away his umbrella outside the carriage. The carriage was beautifully decorated, and there was a candle lamp on the table. Tang Juxian, who was dressed in rich clothes, was sitting on the couch. After months of recuperation, the injury on his forehead suffered outside the Tai Chi hall had healed a lot, but his mood was obviously he had not recovered from that incident, and his eyes were a bit gloomy. Lu Yunlin shook some rainwater off his robe before entering the carriage, sitting down opposite and placing the gift box at hand. Tang Ju got up and poured a cup of tea. His attitude was quite respectful. Deputy Ambassador Lu, is my father's position as Wu Kuei determined? Lu Yunlin smiled kindly. The Tang family has been loyal to the imperial court for many years, and there must be a position of Wu Kuei. The specific time depends on the situation, but when the time comes, the Holy Emperor will definitely come and give the golden plaque in person to set an example for the world's warriors. Tang Ju nodded, feeling a little relieved, and thought for a moment, the world is in a mess now, and the Holy One should sort it out again. A few days ago, the remnant of the Zhu family openly went to the Lu family in Donghai to cause trouble, and did not plead guilty. Not only did he subjugate the law, but he actually became one of the 10 martial leaders. Regarding Tang Ju's complaint, Lu Yunlin shook his head. In the final analysis, Wu Kuei relies on his ability to speak. Zulu defeated Lu Beiming. Even a remnant of the world can still be worthy of the title of Wu Kuei. But with this golden plaque, he definitely doesn't have the courage. Come get it. Tang Ju snorted lightly. If he dares to come, I will be the first to meet him. My Tang family was able to destroy the Zhu family back then, and it is the same now. This was obviously a scene talk. The Tang and Zhu families had a blood feud. Since Zulu showed up, sooner or later he would go to the Tang family to avenge his family's destruction. If Tang Xiao, the head of the Tang family, said this, it would still have some weight. Tang Ju alone, the younger generation, is obviously a bit confused. Lu Yunlin just smiled and did not answer. The carriage passed through the long street in the pouring rain and gradually arrived at the residence of Zhang Xiang, the man who had massacred tens of thousands of people. Zhang Xiang was originally a member of the secret guard, and like AncientChina and others, he was the emperor's personal bodyguard. After being transferred from the secret guard 10 years ago, he returned to his normal status and entered the official career. He also married 2 wives and had children. However, when a dead man is born, it is difficult to change the character developed since childhood. Zhang Xiang is still taciturn and cautious. He only marries a wife and has children just to live like a normal person, and he has been learning to be a normal person. Fastest update mobile version. Like other warriors, Zhang Xiang also accepted disciples. He cared about his promising personal disciple Zhang Tingbao and trained him as his successor since he was young. Zhang Tingbao was called Zhang Shui for this reason. Zhang Tingbao was born in poverty. Although he has just turned 20, he has already married and had children. He gave birth to a son last month, who can be regarded as Zhang Xiang's grandson. Today is the full moon, and Zhang Xiang specially held a full moon party at his home. Not big, just some old friends invited. The pouring rain did not affect the atmosphere in the house. The maids and servants were walking back and forth, mixed with some conversations. Needless to say, the security of Zhang Xiang's mansion is well maintained. There are 4 teams of 12 wolf guards from the Tianzi camp patrolling the surroundings all year round. Ning Qingyi suffered a great loss, and ordinary people in the world would have no hope of getting close. The living room of the mansion is brightly lit, with several taishi chairs placed in it, and guests are sitting in it. The colleagues in the secret guard include Wu Dame Chen Daoping, Taifa Ijija Empress, Qin Renmin Situ Yueming, and Long Hushan Zhongbuxiasi. And the remaining leaders of the Criminal Investigation Department. Although there were only a dozen or so people seated, the portion was enough to frighten the average gangster's legs. Zhang Xiang looked good and didn't talk much as always. He sat at the main seat drinking tea and listening to the guests chatting. Those who can visit Zhang Xiang's house are without exception pro-imperial forces, who were not affected by Iron Eagle's deer hunting 10 years ago. They are all Jianghu people, so naturally they talk about Jianghu affairs. At this time, Zhang Buxi from Longhu Mountain was talking about Wu Kui's incident a few days ago. Lu Beiming's heart is still tied up. He has never fought against anyone in the past 10 years. It's not surprising that he lost. If he keeps walking around in the world, with the background of Lu Jiajian, the outcome is still unclear. Zhang Buxi is a member of the Tianqi mansion in Longhu Mountain. His elder brother Zhang Buhan, together with Wu Dame Chen Daozai, is known as the Shuangsha of the Taoist sect. They are both candidates for the top 10 martial arts leaders. Although he himself is a bit behind, he is also a good player in the world. A master of swordsmanship, this comment was also the thought of most people present. During the conversation, Lu Yunlin and Tang Ju entered the living room and sat down at the back. Due to their status, they did not interrupt. Zhang Xiang just nodded with a smile. Chen Daozai of Wuodane, an expert in swordsmanship, sat next to Zhang Buxi and responded with a smile. There are no empty warriors under the reputation. Lu Beiming's reputation still exists. Even if he doesn't touch the sword for 10 years, he still can't hit 36 swords in a row without hitting the target. In fact, as long as one sword misses, the victory or defeat will be known. Pandeo thinks that Lu Beiming lost on purpose and wanted to teach Zulu the 36 swords of the Lu family. This statement is refreshing, but when I think about it carefully, I feel that it is very possible. The Jija Empress was born as a knight-errant, and her knowledge was definitely not as good as that of the major martial arts giants. However, the status of a concubine is the highest, and her status is the highest. Even if she has been a concubine for a lifetime, she cannot change the problems of Jianghu people. At this time, she interrupted. The Lu family's 36 swords are the Lu family's special skill in the East China Sea. Lu Beiming tried his best. Even if he couldn't defeat him, even if he used all the 36 swords, he couldn't be countered by one move. Then Mr. Zulu couldn't dodge for 36 consecutive swords. 6 swords. What Dao Zhang Chen said does make sense. Situ Yueming thought for a moment, this is the same as my brother's 28-way serial knife. If you have cut 28 times without touching anyone, you don't need to use the sword to admit defeat. I guess it was really Lu Beiming's intention. The sword master gave up his position. When Tang Ju heard this, as one of the 4 great swordsmen, he must have been a little anxious, so he quietly interjected. Seniors, the Donghai Lu family and the Zhu family have been competing for hundreds of years. Why would they teach the descendants of the Zhu family their secrets? Hearing this, many people present shook their heads and chuckled, but did not answer. However, they knew very well that back then, the imperial iron eagle was hunting deer, and if King Su hadn't kept his hand, the Donghai Lu family would have followed in the footsteps of the Zhu family. Although the Lu family saved the lives of the whole family, the old head of the family died under the iron hoof of Ziliang. Jianghu people pay blood debts with blood. This hatred of the Lu family will definitely not be blamed on King Su. Although Zhangxiang is called the slaughter of thousands of people, to put it bluntly, he is just a thug. He will do whatever the emperor says. He really wants revenge. Must be looking for the one in the imperial city. But like all the Jianghu people who came to Beijing to seek revenge, many came to kill Zhangxiang, but few dared to kill the emperor. The same was true for the Lu family of Donghai. Lu Beiming couldn't ask for justice from the emperor, so it was reasonable to wish Lu a smooth favor. The Jia Empress thought for a moment and then said, Zulu was rumored to be a miracle in the market. What's the story about a swordsman in a bamboo hat holding an ordinary iron sword and using the heads of 7 heroes from the east as a stepping stone? The 12 gates of the East China Sea retreated 100 steps away. Dare to watch, swords are like dragons coming out of the sea, and geniuses come into the world, etc. They are like gods, but I don't know what the actual situation is. Situ Yueming chuckled, storytellers in the market love to talk nonsense. Last month, the battle between King Kui in the Tai Chi Hall was said to be the storm will change and Kowloon will come to court. In fact, it was raining heavily that day. Su Shizi and the baby named Zhou had a fight on the roof, and they were soaked like a drowned rat. Ha ha ha. Everyone nodded and chuckled, having heard this for a long time. While he was talking, a thunder suddenly sounded. Thunderbolt. Thunder light pierced the sky, and the majestic Chang'an turned into daylight in an instant. There was a thunderstorm, so everyone didn't pay attention. They just stopped talking for a while, but their eyes immediately focused again. Under the lightning light, a long black shadow appeared in the living room, printed in the middle of the living room, and the shadow of the sword's edge fell just right on Zhangxiang's throat. Everyone turned their heads and saw a swordsman in a hat, with a 3-foot sword pointing diagonally at the ground, quietly approaching and standing in front of the door. Drops of rainwater fell on the floor tiles along the blade, making a soft sound of ta-ta. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 226. It rained heavily. Thunder light streaked across the sky one after another, and the majestic Chang'an went back and forth between day and polar night. It seemed that the whole world was only filled with the sound of thunder and rain and 2 figures walking on the street. There was 2 fingers of rainwater on the bluestone street. A man in front of him was wearing a raincoat and a bamboo hat. He was holding an unsheathed iron sword in his hand. The raindrops formed a thin line and slid to the ground along the edge of the sword. The water splashes were suppressed by the heavy rain before they splashed. Go down. Da-da. The sound of footsteps was inaudible in the thunderstorm, and the big raindrops hit the bamboo hat, making a soft crackling sound. The girl behind was not tall, and she was covered tightly in a big bamboo hat. She was almost dwarfed by the pouring rain. She followed behind the man, holding her raincoat tightly to prevent the rain from spilling in, and whispered. "Mr. Su, where are we going?" "Jianghu." Su Buring walked leisurely with his sword in hand and replied calmly. Zhu Manzi was a little confused. After thinking about it, he reached out and touched Su Buling's hand under the raincoat. "I don't have a fever, maybe it rained too much and my brain got wet." Su Buling was a little bored and turned his head. "I'm going to do something, what are you doing with me?" Zhu Manzi chuckled, but he just stayed close to him anyway. "We agreed to go out in the world together. I am very good at running away. Later, when the master is doing something, I will stand far away and see the situation. If something goes wrong, run away. What if I'm blocked and can't beat you? I brought the communication fireworks. When the situation was bad, I would set off the fireworks. Usually the thieves would be scared away." Su Buletinling paused, raised his hand, put it into Zhu Manzi's arms and touched it. "Ah!" Zhu Manzi quickly dodged, but was hugged by the shoulders and could only twist around and said. "My hands are wet and it's so cold." Su Buling touched Nuanuan's body, took out the communication fireworks hidden on his waist and threw them aside, saying softly. "I'm going to make trouble for you, Mr. Zhang. You set off some fireworks to attract all the wolves, and I'll die anyway." Zhu Manzi was stunned for a moment, a little confused. "What are you doing with Mr. Zhang? Has he provoked you?" Su Buling shook his head. "Old sword master Zhu Chushan died under the siege of the Wolf Guard masters. I will help you beat Zhang Xiang to vent your anger." Zhu Manzi blinked and thought carefully. "It turns out that the young master is doing it for me. Actually, it's not necessary. I have never been to Yuzhu. What happened before sounds just like the story, and Mr. Zhang is also unjust. The Wolf Guard obeyed orders. The Wolf Guard, know best. Those gangsters who are ordered to be killed by the imperial court do not dare to trouble the imperial court. They all hate us, the Wolf Guard." Su Buling naturally knew this truth and said softly, "That's why I gave him a blow to vent my anger. The old sword master may have died under the dragon lock gu 10 years ago. I still have to ask about the situation at that time. That's all by the way." Zhu Manzi suddenly understood and nodded. "Is the young master helping me to vent my anger and asking for news, or is he helping me to vent my anger while asking for news?" Su Buling smiled calmly. "What do you think?" Zhu Manzi shrugged his nose and bumped Su Buling's shoulder lightly. "It's the same. Today seems to be Master Zhang's grandson's full moon wine. There must be experts in the house. Young master, please be careful." Su Buling learned the news from Lao Xiao, but the specific situation was not clear, so he asked immediately. "How many people are there and how tall are they?" Zhu Manzi thought for a while. "Mr. Zhang is usually reticent and doesn't have many friends. It should be just a few people in the yamen." Su Buling nodded and said nothing more. The two of them walked near Zhang Xiang's mansion, and Su Buletinling whistled softly. On the street, Lao Qi appeared from the darkness, raised his hand and threw something to Su Buling, and then stood aside waiting for instructions. Zhu Manzi was startled when he saw someone suddenly appearing next to him, and quickly moved away from Su Buling. "Protect Manzi. Promise." Lao Qi nodded slightly and followed Zhu Manzi. Su Buling raised his hand to keep the two of them farther away, took out the pills from his arms that could stimulate the tongue and throat and make the voice hoarse, put it in his mouth, and came to the entrance of the alley outside Zhang Xiang's mansion. It was raining heavily, and the alley was deserted. Only 2 lanterns swaying in the wind and rain hung on the gate at the end, and the bluestone pavement could hardly be seen clearly. Su Buling closed his eyes, twitched his ears slightly to listen to the sound of thunderstorm, then opened his eyes again, slipped out a row of copper coins from his sleeves, and walked into the alley. Zhu Manzi followed from a distance. As a wolf guard, He naturally knew how many informants were outside Zhang Xiang's mansion. He was a little anxious but did not dare to remind him. He wanted to talk to Lao Qi, but suddenly he heard a soft sound of breaking wind. Rustle. The copper coins cut through the rain curtain and hit the eaves, roofs and other dark places on the left and right sides of the alley. The originally deserted alley suddenly heard the sound of people falling to the ground. Several black figures fell from the eaves. The sharp blades in their hands flashed coldly under the lightning and fell to the ground with a crisp sound. Covered again by the sound of rain. Rustle, rustle. 12 copper coins were gently thrown away, and with a flick of the finger, they shot out almost at the same time. After the sound of 12 falling to the ground, the alley became calm again, except that there were more wolf guards lying on the ground. Zhu Manzi's mouth widened, as if he had seen a god, and he was stunned for a long time without regaining consciousness. There was a bit of pride in Lao Qi's eyes, and he still had the guts to say something. The young prince was able to fight 1,000 at the age of 16. Now he is 19, and can at least fight 400. What are these guys? But the dragon-locking goo. Old Seven did not speak, and Zhu Manzi had to look into the alley again. The housekeeper and servants who were welcoming guests outside the mansion heard the sound and were squinting at the dark alley. Suddenly, a few copper coins flew over, and their eyes went black and they fainted. Su Buling walked slowly to the gate with a sword in his hand and entered the mansion as if no one was around. Most of Zhang Xiang's family members lived in the back house, while Zhang Tingbao lived in the mansion next door. There were not many people in the outer house, and the maids and servants who served tea and water were all knocked over without exception. Su Buling followed the layout of the residence and came to the living room of Zhang's house. He knew there were guests inside, but he didn't care so much. He walked directly into the brightly lit living room and looked up, the fastest update on mobile. Zhang Xiang, Sidu Yueming, Chen Daoping, Zhizhaniang Niang, Zhang Bushi, Tangju. Su Buling narrowed his eyes slightly and stopped at the door. I have to tear up Lao Xiao's Spring Palace jade tree picture when I go back. What kind of information is this? Zhu Manzi and Lao Qi followed secretly behind, lying on the roof of a tall building, sticking their heads out, and gasped when they saw the scene in the living room. Or let's run, Mr. Su runs fast. SHH. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guangguang Zi. Chapter 227. Thunderbolt. Thunder streaked across the rainy night, and Chang'an City was calm. No one noticed the small commotion in a mansion in Kongrenfang. Raindrops hit the tiles with a crackling sound, and Lao Qi stared at the surrounding situation intently. The people sitting in the living room were all Jianghu people or the emperor's guards, so there was no need for guards to guard them. The rest of the mansion was very quiet. Zhu Manzi lay on the roof in a straw raincoat, half of her head stuck out from the ridge, staring at the living room across the rain curtain with her mouth wide open, not even blinking. In the thunderstorm, the living room became even quieter. More than a dozen people stood up and stared at the man in the straw raincoat standing in the middle of the living room. The candlelight occasionally swayed in the wind, and the shadows dragged on the ground were motionless. The atmosphere was oppressive and a little suffocating. Just you. Su Buling pointed his long sword at the ground, and his eyes under the bamboo hat indifferently swept over the people around him. Zhang Xiang's eyes were gloomy, with a bit of anger. Jianghu is Jianghu, and the court is the court. In the heart of Chang'an, under the feet of the emperor, the imperial court is arresting traitors. How can it be said that the majority cannot bully the minority? Catch him. A light sigh sounded in the living room. Fastest update on mobile phone. Lu Yunlin and several Wolf Guard leaders immediately blocked the retreat. They did not bring weapons to the full moon banquet, but so many masters with bare hands should not be underestimated. Chen Daoping and Zhang Bushi were the best martial artists present. They separated from the left and right and attacked Su Buling with their palms at the same time like an eagle catching a rabbit. Zhang Xiang let go and pulled out the goose feather knife from the knife table under the middle hall of the living room. After a crisp sound of clang, a cold knife slashed towards the center of the living room. The 9-section whip slipped out of the sleeves of the palace skirt of the 9-section lady and was thrown in the living room, making a snap sound of whip. In the brightly lit living room, murderous intent was lurking in an instant. Su Buling stood with the sword in hand, facing the palms that came from the air without dodging or avoiding them. His boots shook the stone tiles on the ground violently, and the tiles broke into pieces. At the same time, the figure had already arrived in front of the two Taoists, and the sword in his hand was like a white snake spitting out its tongue, stabbing Chen Daoping's throat. "Be careful!" Everyone was on high alert. He was a master who had been famous in the martial arts world for a long time, so he would definitely not rush forward to die. Chen Daoping was originally a feint, and he retracted his palm halfway, waving his sleeves like the wind, trying to wrap up the attacking sword. The long boots on the feet of Tianchi Zhangbuxi rubbed a white line on the ground, and his 5 fingers were like hooks, grabbing Su Buling's legs from the bottom 3 ways. The 9-section whip in the hands of the 9-section lady had been swung out, and it entangled the sword blade without any error. As long as this joint attack succeeded and restricted it, Zhang Xiang, who rushed over, could cut off the thief's head from behind Chen Daoping. Unfortunately, even if the 4 of them were knowledgeable, they would not understand the significance of the 8 words 1 against 1,000, martial arts to the gods. There was a crisp sound of snap. Su Buling twisted the iron sword in his hand and smashed Chen Daoping's Taoist robe sleeves into pieces. The cloth pieces splashed out and actually scratched several blood marks on the faces of the surrounding wolf guards. Crash! The 9-section whip was pulled and made a crisp sound. The movements of everyone in the living room seemed to be stagnant, only Su Buling was moving. Because it was too fast, it was so fast that Zhang Xiang could only see the flash of the sword. Su Buling twisted the sword tip, and the huge force pulled the 9-section lady holding the 9-section whip and staggered. The 9-sectioned queen had just felt the great force coming from her hand, and before she could throw away the 9-sectioned whip, a palm came from nowhere and hit her chest. The soft but strong force shook her internal organs. Her not-so-heavy body was immediately knocked out, and she coughed in the air, then fell into the armchair, slid back a little, and then her neck tilted and she fainted. The action was too fast, and Zhang Xiang and others had no time to stop it. Seeing that the Queen Mother was injured, her eyes were even more furious. Zhang Bushi had already grabbed Su Buling's calf with his claws, and the Heavenly Master's robe suddenly bulged. He pulled back with both hands, trying to throw Su Buling to the ground. Chen Daoping took back his palm, and before he could slap it again, Zhang Xiang's Yanling knife silently pierced through the sleeves of the Taoist robe that had just been torn, until Su Buling's heart. His legs were restricted and he couldn't move. Facing Zhang Xiang's knife, it was obviously a dead situation. But what the 3 of them didn't expect was that Zhang Bushi pulled with all his strength, and the legs in his hands really didn't move at all, as if nailed to the ground. Zhang Bushi's eyes flashed with surprise, and he thought it was not good and wanted to withdraw, but he didn't expect his shoulder to be cold, and he felt a piercing pain. The sword directly pierced through his shoulder blade, pierced from the back to the front, and nailed more than 3 inches into the ground. A short muffled groan. Su Buling was unarmed, and he didn't care about the claws on his legs at all. He bent his knees slightly and rushed forward, holding the Yanling knife with his palms together. Zhang Xiang chopped with the knife, as if he had chopped into the dark wood. The blade was hard to move forward, and then he twisted the blade with the force of a bull, causing his wrist to turn, and the Yanling knife immediately twisted into a strange arc. Ha! Su Buling restrained the Yanling knife without stopping his body. He shouted fiercely, and his shoulder hit Chen Daoping's chest and abdomen like a battering ram. There was a crisp sound of "ka," and the bones were broken and the chest was sunken. Before Chen Daoping's palm landed on Su Buling's forehead, he was knocked out by the mountain support and hit Zhang Xiang behind him. The two of them stuck together and flew backwards for more than 10 feet, smashing the tea table on the main seat. And until this time, the first to be knocked out, the 9-section lady, hit the armchair. Hiss. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. From the perspective of Lu Yunlin and others, it was nothing more than 4 people rushing up, then 3 flying out, and 1 was nailed to the ground. They exchanged several moves without seeing it clearly. The leaders of the Wolf Guards had no idea that the 3 secret guard masters would be instantly defeated by Zhang Xiang and even lose his sword. They were stunned on the spot as if they saw Shura coming into the world. Lu Yunlin was quick thinking, and when he saw that the situation was not good, he turned around and wanted to run out. It's a pity that Su Buling is not confused. After repelling the 4 masters who surrounded him, Su Buring ignored Zhang Xiang and Chen Daoping who had just fallen out. His footsteps wandered like a cheetah attacking, leaving only the afterimage of the black-robed hunter. In an instant, several Wolf Guard leaders arrived. In front of him, after knocking down several people with 3 punches and 2 kicks, he waved his sleeves and rolled up a teacup on the tea table. Rustle. The teacup was like a crossbow being stripped of its strings, making a horrifying sound, but not even a drop of tea splashed out. As it slid across the living room, the lid, cup, and coaster separated, hitting the backs of the 3 fleeing men's heads. Snap! Porcelain pieces shattered and flew into pieces, and the 3 running figures fell to the ground at the same time, lifeless. Su Buling pulled up his bamboo hat at this time and turned his head to look at the living room where broken wood was scattered all over the tables and chairs. 9 people were lying on the ground, not knowing whether they were alive or dead. Zhang Buling had an iron sword stuck in his back and his face was sickly red. The 9 Festival Empress was paralyzed. On the Taishi chair, some wind and rain drifted in through the broken window, blowing the candles and swaying. Ahem. Chen Daoping's eyes were blood red, and he kept coughing up blood drops. He tried to get up, but after gritting his teeth several times, his arms weakened and he lay on the ground without making any sound. Zhang Xiang had already stood up, with a gloomy face, staring at the Yanling Dao held in the opponent's hand over there, clenching his fists without saying a word. The wind and rain blow outside the building, and the lights in the pavilion are lit with blood. There are dragons and tigers hidden in the cold pool, and no one can pass by with a sword. The living room, where they were chatting and laughing just now, was left in a desperate silence. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 228. Despair. In the living room, there was only the soft sound of water drops on the bamboo hat occasionally dripping on the ground. Su Buling lightly kicked Zhang Buxi's forehead with his boot, knocking Zhang Buxi unconscious as he gritted his teeth and tried to get up. Holding Zhang Xiang's sword in his hand, he dragged an intact Taishi chair from the side of the Jia Empress, put it down in front of Zhang Xiang, flicked the hem of his robe and sat down, raising his hand to signal. Zhang Xiang clenched his fists and glanced at the people in the living room. Although they all fell down, no one was dead. This just right force was far more frightening than the river of blood. Zhang Xiang looked at the coir raincoat guest sitting on the Taishi chair. After a moment of silence, he walked to the chair next to him and sat down. "Sir, what do you want to ask?" Su Buling leaned on the Taishi chair, brushed his fingers over the sharp blade, and spoke in a hoarse voice. "It's about the Zhu family in Yuzhu." Zhang Xiang glanced at Su Buling's attire and the iron sword inserted into Zhang Buxi's body. Judging from the skill just now, the newly promoted sword master Zhu Lu must have this ability, and this problem is also related to Zhu Liu's blood feud, so the identity is easy to guess. He can't think of anyone else except Zhu Lu. "You are the sword master Zhu Lu." Su Buletinling covered his face with a bamboo hat, only revealing his chin wrapped in a black scarf, and said in a calm voice. You don't have to worry about who I am. Answer truthfully and save the lives of everyone present. Zhang Xiang squeezed the handle of the chair, his knuckles turned white, and he was obviously very angry inside. The police officers of the Criminal Investigation Department who were investigating Lu Lin were always feared in the world. As the external face of the Criminal Investigation Department, how had he ever received such a threat? But the world is like this. Only those who are standing are qualified to speak, but those who are lying down are not qualified. When it is time to bow your head, you will not be tolerated. Zhang Xiang was silent for a moment and shook his head. I am not a Jianghu person. I only respect the word loyalty. As the chief of the Criminal Investigation Department, in charge of the secret files of the case, if a knife can make me speak, Your Majesty will also. This responsibility will not be placed on me. Su Buling nodded slightly, looked at the knife in his hand, and said in a calm voice. Master Zhang was born as a dead soldier. No one doubts his loyalty to the current Holy Emperor. Even if his hands and feet are severed, there is probably nothing he can ask. Zhang Xiang raised his head slightly, his eyes cold and without any fear. I only ask about the Zhu family's affairs, how old Sword Master Zhu died, and nothing else. Zhang Xiang's face was expressionless and his voice was cold. The officials have already concluded this case. The Yuzhu Zhu family disobeyed the imperial order and was deemed to be complicit in treason. All the men in the family were beheaded in public. Everyone knows it, so there is no need to ask any more. Su Buling shook his head. Only half of what the officials said is true. What I want to ask is how and who killed old Sword Master Zhu that day. Zhang Xiang snorted lightly. I will lead the team, and the Criminal Investigation Department will work together with the Tang family and Kui family in Yuzhu to arrest and eliminate thieves for the country. I have never denied it. Su Buling took a breath and raised his bamboo hat slightly. Tang Qiao, the Kui family's disciples, and some eagle dogs from the detective department were able to wipe out the entire Zhu family, but they couldn't wipe out the old Sword Master Zhu. How did you kill them? Zhang Xiang narrowed his eyes slightly and said nothing. There are many people who are not afraid of death, but as long as they are human beings, there are always things they care about. Master Zhang thinks the same. Let me tell you a story. Su Buletinling looked at the Yanling Dao in his hand and said calmly. Xingguifang in Chang'an City is where the poor live. There is a ruined temple inside, where many beggars gather. They are poor children whose parents died of illness or starvation. They make a living by begging and stealing money every day. Most of them will not survive. Starved to death or beaten to death at the age of 20. Among these children, one was more ambitious. He starved to death without food, and refused to bow his head when beaten to death. He went to do hard labor at the age of 7 or 8, that is, carrying sacks, chopping firewood, etc., but there was no one to work as a laborer at such a young age. If you want, you can't have enough to eat. The child just held on, and when he was about to starve to death, he finally found a suitable job. Some of the houses of wealthy people are paved with floor coverings. If they are burned down over the winter, they will accumulate soot and need to be cleaned. The Earth Dragon's fire tunnel is so narrow that adults can't get in. The boy, who has not had enough to eat since he was a child and is thin, can just get in. So, that kid found a way to make money and went to wealthy people one by one to recommend themselves to clean up the fire dragons. I worked like this for a few months. One day, when I was cleaning the back house of a member of the family, the daughter of the member of the family came over out of curiosity, squatted outside the fire tunnel and stared at it. When the child climbed out, it was already covered from head to toe. The two of them giggled together, and the young lady even wiped his face with a handkerchief. From then on, the boy became very ambitious and worked double the hard work every day. He even worked as a laborer in the shop of Yuan's wife's house. The young lady often leaned on the courtyard wall and secretly threw some wrapped cakes to him. Satisfy hunger. But untouchables are untouchables. It's hard for them to live with a wealthy daughter after working hard all their life. Su Buling stroked the Yanling knife and raised his eyes to look at Zhang Xiang, but maybe God rewards hard work. That boy was lucky and met a benefactor one day. The benefactor asked him, "Do you want to have a big life?" "Promise." He replied, "I think." Then he became the benefactor's apprentice, taught him martial arts, and restored his identity. In the end, he really had a great future. Not only did he become an official, but he also brought the young lady with great glory. Married back home. Zhang Xiang frowned and pinched the armrest of the chair. "What exactly do you want to say?" Su Buling took a breath. When that child grew up, he only had two people in his heart. One was his adoptive father who made him successful, and the other was his wife who secretly gave him food when he was poor. Put them as the only family member, I am always ready to risk my life for my family. While talking, Su Buling took out a longevity lock from his arms and wore it with a red string. Suddenly, veins popped up on Zhang Xiang's forehead, and his breathing became a little heavier. Su Buling looked at Chang Xiaozhuo and sighed softly. Last month, the child gave birth to a son, and the family became three. He could wake up laughing when dreaming, and he even named his son Zhang Ao. I hope my son can be as powerful as his adoptive father. Click. The armrest of the chair was crushed to pieces. Su Buling raised his bamboo hat slightly and said softly, "Mr. Zhang was born as a dead man. He doesn't care about life or death, and he doesn't care about his family. But his family cares about you." Zhang Tingbao finally got through it after so many years. His father is a good wife and his son has just been born. Mr. Zhang can't bear to let others destroy him. Blue veins popped up on Zhang Xiang's forehead. He took a few deep breaths and said coldly, "I alone bear the grievances of the past. Does it bring harm to the family?" Su Buling looked at the Yanling saber in his hand, which had killed countless Jianghu people, and said coldly, "Even the Jianghu people don't abide by this rule, let alone Mr. Zhang. The Zhu family is full of men. Is it possible that everyone deserves their punishment?" Zhang Xiang held sawdust in his hand. The sawdust pricked the skin on his hand, and blood flowed like a stream. "The Tingbao family is young, are they safe?" Su Buling put away the longevity lock. "If you answer truthfully, nothing will happen today." There was silence in the living room, except for the thunderstorm outside the window. Zhang Xiang sat on the chair for a long time, and the blood in his hand fell to the floor, gradually turning into a pool of blood. 10 years ago, Zhu Kangshan did not obey the imperial court's orders. The Tang family and the Kui family were both in Yuzhu. They had a feud with the Zhu family for a long time, so they went around the court and punished the Zhu family for the crime of treason. Lao Yi, Tang Xiao, and Kui Ying, led the 300 wolf guards and the retainers of the two families to surround and suppress the Zhu family. Su Buling nodded lightly. Lao Yi knew from his name that he was of the same generation as Eunuch Xia, but he had never seen him before, so he was probably the one hiding underground in Chang'an City. The fortune teller's sword Zhu Silkshan has surpassed a generation in the martial arts world, and his martial arts reached its peak. The four of us fought against him 3 times, but we couldn't defeat him. Our strong bows and powerful crossbows were not as fast as Zhu Silkshan's sword, so we could only destroy Zhu's entire family. For this reason, Zhu Kangshan was restricted to the vicinity of Zhu's house to prevent him from escaping. Zhu Silk Mountain didn't leave, but you still destroyed the entire Zhu family. The law shows no mercy and only obeys orders. Jia Gongongzi only begged the Holy One for mercy and only killed men. Su Buling nodded. "Since I can't beat him, how can I kill the old sword master Zhu?" Zhang Xiang clenched his palms tightly and was silent for a moment. The Kui family borrowed dragon locking goo from somewhere, and Zhu Silk Mountain was poisoned, and eventually died of the poison. Lock dragon goo. Su Buling was silent for a moment. Prince Su's crown prince was also infected by the locking dragon goo the year before last. Is there still a dragon locking goo in the hands of the court? Zhang Xiang took a breath and said, after the Zhu family incident, Lao Yi robbed the dragon lock goo. The inner treasury was stolen the summer before last and its whereabouts are unknown. Are you four the only ones who killed old sword master Zhu? The four of us are the leaders. Su Buling nodded slightly, inserted the Yanling knife into the ground, and threw out the longevity lock. Zhang Xiang caught the longevity lock, frowned, and looked at the back of the koi raincoat guest. Won't you kill me and silence me? Su Buling paused and tilted his head slightly. As the emperor's personal guard, you leaked the secret files of the case, and the whole family was copied and executed. Since you know that the disaster does not harm the family, if you are willing to risk the lives of Zhang Tingbao and his family, why should I do it? Zhang Xiang held the longevity lock in his hand, took a deep breath, lowered his head and looked at the longevity lock in his hand. The silver longevity lock was stained with blood and glistened under the candlelight. Su Buling pulled out the long sword from Zhang Buxi's back and wiped the blood with his sleeve. It's difficult to protect our family and our country. If you want to be a normal person, how can you not have your own ideas? Without your son, you can't survive today. After saying that, Su Buling walked out of the room with his sword and entered the pouring rain. Zhang Xiang rubbed the longevity lock with his fingers and gritted his teeth for a long time. Until the figure disappeared, a faint sigh sounded in the quiet living room. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 229. The dark moon kills people on a night, and the wind blows high and sets people on fire. Extremely bad weather will inevitably cause flaws in the originally impregnable defenses. The sound of thunderstorms and extremely low visibility are natural night clothes. When the environment is placed in the dense mountains and forests, the roar of the mountain streams provides a huge source of protection for the unsuspecting people. Convenience. In the bamboo forest behind Furong Temple, thousands of green bamboos were bent down by the rain and strong wind. The rustling sound of the raindrops hitting the bamboo leaves almost made it impossible for the maids who were hiding from the rain in the house to even hear their voices. Ching, he could only sleep soundly by covering his head with a quilt. Deep in the bamboo forest, on the edge of the cliff, there was a light burning in the house, which stood out in the pattering rain, but seemed out of reach. Hoo-hoo dash. The heavy breathing and footsteps trampling on the rocks and trees were obscured by the sound of thunder and rain. Occasionally, a flash of lightning flashed, and you could see from the sky a black figure moving up the cliff below the bamboo house at an extremely fast speed. There was no path on the cliff, only vegetation. Despite the withered vines and rugged rocks, the black shadow walked on the ground without any hindrance. In about 3/4 of an hour, the shadow climbed from the foot of the mountain to the bottom of the cliff by the bamboo sea. He stopped with his hand on the stone and listened to the movement above. Through the light of the lightning, one could see a stalwart man, carrying an eyebrow-level stick on his back, hanging on a stone like an ape, with the Wanren mountain cliff below him, but he did not move at all and showed no sign of panic. Ha dash. The mountain is not very high, but climbing up from the roadless cliff in one go is obviously not an easy task. While the man was resting, he pulled up the black cloth around his neck and covered his face, then he swung directly up to the open space in front of the house. Tread. The footsteps landed and made a slight sound. The man was not very cautious, because the job he took was just to help a rich young man vent his anger and come over to beat up another rich young man. Afterwards, he was given 500 taels of silver and even the route up the mountain was arranged. It was considered a simple deal. The man glanced around and saw that there was no living thing in the dense bamboo forest. The rain was so heavy that he couldn't even see more than 10 feet in front of him. He immediately took off the eyebrow stick from behind and strode towards the brightly lit house. Tread. Just after taking 2 steps, the man's ears twitched slightly, and the cold air was coming from his back. He swiped the stick behind him without hesitation. Clang! The eyebrow-level stick collided with the wooden crutch, but it made the sound of gold and iron clashing. The force was so great that it forcefully shook the falling rain curtain out of a momentary hole. Hiss dash! 2 slightly surprised voices sounded at the same time. The man's expression suddenly changed, and he swiped his stick behind him. He clearly heard the sound, but when he turned around, he saw no one. Beat up an ordinary rich boy. The man's heart sank, knowing that he had been tricked, and without hesitation he rushed towards the cliff to escape. It's a pity that the protection around a bamboo forest can be described as a dragon's pond and a tiger's den. Swish swish. At almost the same moment as the collision sound was made, 6 figures appeared from everywhere in the bamboo forest. 5 retainers of the Xiao family landed near the house with swords in their hands. Ning Yuhi, who was dressed in black robes and held the sword Beiqiu, had already appeared on the cliff and blocked the retreat. Shan Shan, the palace guard, arrived late. But it was already nearby. Old Xiao stood on the roof with his crutch, looking down at the man holding the stick below, and frowned. "Any friends on the road, tell me by name." The disciples of the Xiao family saw the fight just now, and their faces were serious at this time, and they did not dare to be careless at all. They knew a little about Lao Xiao's details that others did not know. One of the 2 gate gods of Prince Su's palace, a figure of the same era as Zhu Kangshan, nicknamed Kun Yunzi in the world. His lightness skills are unrivaled in the world. From Prince Su Yubeo to Crown Prince Su Buling, he was able to ambush and annihilate all his followers in the Huihe River. Next, you can see his strength by carrying Su Buling, who was seriously injured, out of a desperate situation. And just now, Lao Xiao's sneak attack with the stick was actually noticed by the man. This extraordinary perception alone is definitely not something that ordinary martial arts masters can have. The man sensed that something was wrong and had no intention of stopping to be polite. He strode towards the edge of the cliff and saw Ning Yuhi's sword striking sharply. He raised his stick and made a diagonal slash. The force was so strong that raindrops touched the tip of the stick. It was turned into water mist. Yaksha stick. Lao Xiao and Ning Yuhi are both experienced people in the world, and their eyes narrowed slightly when they saw this gesture. The stick is the ancestor of all weapons. As the saying goes, fists are afraid of young men, and sticks are afraid of old wolves. Fighting with a stick is not about skill. Those with strong strength can have a lot of advantages in fighting with bare hands, but it is different with a stick. The stick method does not focus on strength in the moves, but on skills, using both hardness and softness. A 3-year-old child can hit someone with a stick, but the skill of using the stick well can only be achieved by the older generation in their 60s. The man in front of him uses the Yaksha stick as a skill from the northern Xinjiang. Because the 2 countries have been in conflict for many years, there are many people in the army, but those who can use it to this extent are very rare in the world. Ning Yuhi used his sword to lift the eyebrow stick, and the sword was bent into an arc. The Taoist priest leaned back and leaned over, and the sword blade stabbed the man at a strange angle again. Dang dang dang. After 3 crisp sounds, the man was forced back to the front of the house. Lao Xiao narrowed his eyes slightly and noticed that although the man's skills were superb, his lower body was unstable. It seemed that there was an old injury in his left leg that caused uneven force exertion. After thinking about it for a moment, he said, "Lei Gong stick Cao Meng." When Ning Yuhi heard the name, his face became more solemn, and he held his sword and did not approach any further. Several disciples of the Xiao family also gathered around, with a bit of surprise in their eyes. Cao Meng was a short-lived knight-errant in the world a few years ago. The reason why he was said to be short-lived was not because of his low martial arts skills, but because of his ups and downs. Quick. About 7 or 8 years ago, a man who called himself Cao Meng suddenly appeared in northern Xinjiang. He carried an eyebrow-level stick and picked up several martial arts schools from Taiyuan to Qingzhou. Stick. Jianghu has always been a place where there are mountains beyond the mountains. If you are too crazy when you first come out of Jianghu, you will probably end up bad. After Cao Meng walked to Qingzhou, he heard that Chen Chong, the spear god of northern Xinjiang, was nearby, so he ran over to call for formation. Chen Chong has been famous in northern Xinjiang for many years. He and Sidu Yuejin are in the same group. The top leaders in the northern arena are not the instructors of those martial arts schools. Cao Meng was a little confused and didn't understand that people in the world of martial arts ask their elders to give advice and discuss skills, so he just twisted the stick and went to the door. The two had a fight at that time. What was surprising was that Cao Meng was not beaten to death. Instead, he fought with Chen for more than 10 moves. Although he lost in the end and had one of his legs broken, his skills were absolutely unparalleled in the world. It's top-notch. Since then, Cao Meng has disappeared. Some say he was disheartened and retreated into the world, while others say he realized his shame and bravely returned home to practice martial arts in preparation for avenging his shame. There are only a few people who still remember this person. Lao Xiao has been telling stories in Gulan restaurant for many years and is very familiar with Cao Meng's deeds. He would not have recognized him otherwise. In the rainy night, Cao Meng, who was holding an eyebrow-high stick, was no longer the stupid young man he had been. Knowing that the situation was not good, he wanted to retreat. He rushed towards the cliff again with the stick, trying to break through Ning Yuhi's block. Lao Xiao had only heard of Cao Meng and had no other involvement. He dared to approach Prince Su's residence and plot evil, which would be enough to kill him 100 times. Moreover, anyone who dared to do such a thing was determined to die. Nothing comes out. Then he raised his hand. Kill. 5 retainers of the Huainan Xiao family immediately rushed forward with weapons in hand, and Ning Yu took action immediately. Cao Meng's eyes showed a bit of anger. Just by looking at these terrifyingly skilled guards, he knew that he must have broken into a place he shouldn't have broken into. Even if he surrendered, he would be dead. He had no other choice but to escape. Ah! A loud roar sounded in the rain. Cao Meng's eyebrow-raising stick in his hand was so powerful that he forced several people around him to retreat. He wanted to escape, but was stopped by Ning Yuhi. Ning Yuhi was able to defeat 4 in Kong Renfang. If he hadn't been poisoned, it would have been possible to beat Zhang Xiang to the ground. If he couldn't beat Su Buling, it didn't mean that he couldn't beat a wanderer who had retired for many years. Dang dang dang. But after 3 strikes, the long sword in Ning Yuhi's hand poked a hole in Cao Meng's left shoulder. 5 Xiao family disciples and countless guards swarmed in, and the open space in front of the house was immediately filled with water, and shouts of death were heard everywhere. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 230. Kang thunder resounded through Chang'an, and the rain did not decrease, but became more and more intense. Su Buling walked out of Zhang Xiang's residence wearing a raincoat. He didn't care about the heavy rain and was just thinking about the news he had just asked. According to the information obtained so far, the general process should be: before Jiazi, the Xiao family secretly hid the locking dragon Gu. 10 years ago, the Kui family borrowed dragon lock Gu to kill Zhu Kangshan. Afterwards, Song Ji's dead soldier Yi took away the dragon locking Gu. The lock dragon Gu disappeared the summer before last. In winter, he was poisoned by the dragon's poison. The timeline of locking dragon Gu gradually became complete, and the fog covering it became slightly clearer. First of all, there must be someone behind the scenes who deliberately throws bait to interfere with the original sequence of events. Jia Yi said that the evidence of giving the dragon locking Gu to the wolf guards 10 years ago, the remains of the Tomb of Heroes, and the case files are all false at present. The purpose is to lure him to the palace. Secondly, the locking dragon goo had been stored in the emperor's hands for at least 6 or 7 years. The emperor knew about the dragon locking goo. He might have obtained it by the wrong means and it was hard to explain when he lost it, so he didn't say it. However, this theory is also doubtful. After all, the inner treasury is in the imperial city, and the chance of losing it is very small, unless there is an insider in the palace. It was obvious that the person who deliberately lured him into the palace by disrupting the view was not the emperor. If it were the emperor, it would be enough to just release the true news. There is no need to go to great lengths to falsify it. But now that the investigation has revealed that the emperor has nothing to do with locking dragon goo, Su Buling doesn't believe it either. After all, the reason why he came to the capital was because of the widespread rumors that there is a vassal king plotting to unify and the imperial court is preparing to cut down the vassal. Just trying to lay such a big plot against him is too much. Even if he is killed, it will not change the fact that the Su family has too much military power and great achievements. This is because King Su is only in his 40s. If he wants to, he can still give birth to a child. Piles of sons. Therefore, the ultimate purpose of locking him with dragon goo was most likely to reduce the military power of the Su family. It is impossible to cut down vassals for no reason, otherwise it will cause resistance from other vassal kings, so the name is justified. The justified reduction of vassal status must be the fault of the Su family. In order for the Su family to make a big mistake that could lead to the removal of the vassalage, the only way is to commit rebellion. King Su would obviously not take the initiative to plot rebellion. The simpler thing would be to let his martial arts prodigy deceive the emperor while he was in the capital. He had a reason for deceiving the emperor, so he led various clues to the emperor and sent him detoxifying wine to ensure that he could restore his martial arts to a certain extent. When he was cornered by the dragon lock goo and couldn't bear it anymore, risking his life and making a big mistake, the imperial court cut off the vassalage with a single blow. Su Buling frowned tightly and checked again and again. Although he didn't find out who was behind it, he finally figured out the purpose of the person behind the scenes. Only with this purpose in mind can we arrange such a lot of things in a mess. Once you know the purpose, the way to break the situation is simple. Whether it was the emperor or others who set up this situation, it was all for him to deceive the emperor and commit crimes when he was desperate, so as to form the conditions for reducing the vassal. Then he did the opposite, that is, he didn't deceive the emperor, and even stayed loyal. The hands were on his body. Anyway, now that there was no dragon lock goo, he didn't believe that he would not make any mistakes. He would study in Chang'an City honestly. The imperial court he could also be executed on unfounded charges and the vassalage of King Su was reduced. The imperial court really dares to act like this. The Seven Kings King Junzi is no joke. Thinking of this, Su Buling's mind calmed down a little. The heavy rain pounded on the bamboo hat, bending the edge of the bamboo hat. Zhu Manzi held the bamboo hat with both hands and trotted to Su Buling's side. Now that he was far away from Zhang Xiang's mansion, he chirped with shock and admiration on his face. Wow, 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 Prince Su, you are so powerful. A dozen or so people were gone in a blink of an eye. You are even more powerful than my father. Su Buling threw the iron sword to Zhu Manzi with a calm expression. Don't you listen to books every day? With your ability to defeat 1,000 people and your martial arts skills, do you think you are just talking nonsense? Zhu Manzi was a little excited. He hung the sword on his waist. His face was red. After thinking about it, he squeezed under Su Buling's arm. He stood on tiptoes and hooked Su Buling's shoulders like a good brother. He raised his chin. The storyteller also said that the young master bullies men and dominates women and prefers married women. Is it true? Su Buling thought about it carefully and nodded. Zhu Manzi frowned, raised his fist and lightly hit Su Buling on the shoulder. Mr. Suyu, it's not good for you to do this. Only those perverts can destroy married women. You are so innocent, you are so powerful, so handsome, so talented in literature, and so powerful, how could you do that kind of thing? Su Buling shook his head and chuckled, took his little arm off his shoulder, and held his cold little hand. Then what kind of girl do you think a young man like me should like, Miss Zhu? Zhu Manzi's hand was clenched in the palm of his hand, and he twitched a little, but he didn't pull it out, so that was it. He frowned and thought for a moment. The young master is 19 this year. The girl he likes should be younger than you, the best is 14 years old and above, and she must be able to read and write, so that she can accompany the young master to chat about poetry, and she must also be able to do some martial arts, so I can also give advice to the young master on a regular basis. What about his appearance? If the young master is so beautiful, he must not be too ugly, otherwise he will not be a good match. Su Buling held her little hand and walked in the rain, nodding seriously. I wish you, miss, what you said makes sense. According to you, Ning Qingyi is really suitable. He has a beautiful age, is good at martial arts, and can read and write. He is just the right age. Zhu Manzi blinked, and her face suddenly looked unhappy, but she didn't dare to show it. She lowered her head and whispered. Well, Xiaoning is a taciturn person, and the young master is also a quiet person. Two quiet people get bored together, and two talkative people get together and will definitely quarrel. The young master should find a talkative girl. Su Buling glanced at her slightly. I haven't seen many talkative girls. Zhu Manzi pursed her lips, rolled her eyes and thought for a while. Look slowly, you will meet one eventually. Su Buling nodded, took Zhu Manzi back to the small courtyard, took off the wet robe in the boudoir, and put on a clean robe again. Zhu Manzi lay on the roof for a long time, and her clothes were already soaked. Unfortunately, the room was not big and there was no screen. She hesitated for a while and didn't dare to take them off. She just looked at the paintings on the wall with a red face. After Su Buling dressed neatly, he put on his hat and raincoat again, raised his hand and pinched her face. I will return to the city in a few days, and then I will come to see you. Your father is so powerful, don't worry. After I leave Chang'an, we will go to the rivers and lakes together. Zhu Manzi was naturally yearning, but she was a little embarrassed after seeing Su Buling's skills just now. Young master, you won't dislike me, right? We are brothers of the opposite sex, how can I dislike you? Su Buling chuckled, opened the door and walked out, raised his hand and waved. Zhu Manzi watched him obediently until Su Buling's figure disappeared over the courtyard wall, then she giggled and fell on the bed with satisfaction.